Well, hello all, and welcome to this very exciting Thursday edition of Civilizations in Review. I'm here with Tanya Valdez, all the way coming in from Mexico, to talk about the Macedonian Empire. And with me is a wonderful co-moderator, fellow content writer, Ana Campuzano, also to chat about this great empire. It's probably the one the majority of you know. It is Alexander the Great's empire, and we're going to talk all about the expansion that he and his empire did throughout the Middle East, North Africa. But just to start, again, welcome to the Civilizations in Review podcast, where we talk about all of the incredible ancient historical empires, dynasties, kingdoms, and communities that make up the modern Middle East. Every single writer who joins Alpuzaic begins with this project to expand our knowledge base and to learn more about the cool histories that make up the region. And Tanya, I think, got a really easier one, which is great. I mean, all of them are great and important, but to have one that is very, very well known is a wonderful, wonderful leg up. So I'm glad to talk about it more and learn some of the unknown parts of Macedonian Empire. I'm going to read the 101 word intro and then we'll sort of jump right in. But again, thank you so much, Tanya, for writing it, all the previous live streams you've been on, and Anna for jumping on today, and the 101 that you wrote. So check out the Seljuk Empire elsewhere. Anyways, let's begin. The ancient kingdom of Macedonia, sometimes called Macedon, was located between the Mediterranean and Balkan civilizations. Under the reign of Alexander the Great in the 4th century BCE, Macedonia grew to its largest expanse. For almost 100 years, between 360 and 270 BCE, the Macedonian Empire was one of the most dynamic ancient states. A kingdom of goat herders and frontier riders went on to become the largest empire known in the world at that time. Since the formation of the Republic of North Macedonia in 1991, Macedonians and Greeks have sparred over which country gets to claim the history of ancient Macedonia as its own. I mean, beautiful intro, first and foremost. I love reading the intros because it's such a great beginning to the parts of this empire. But Tanya, I want to start with my favorite question. What prompted you to choose this empire of all of the communities and civilizations we have on our list?
Awesome. Thank you, Ben, for the introduction, and thank you for having me. Well, as you just said, the Macedonian Empire is an empire that we all already know something about. But what I love about Alpuzaic is the fact that I feel like we're all a community of friends and that we're all interested in the same region. So you get to just share the knowledge you get to learn with the rest of us. So I chose the Macedonian Empire because although we've all heard a little bit about it, I felt like there was something we didn't know about. So I just wanted to share that with the rest of us that are interested in the region, so we can just all get to learn a little bit more about it.
Incredible. Thank you. Yeah, I mean, that's exactly what Alpuzaic is for, that community of sharing and knowledge base. And I mean, hey, even the more well-known empires, there's always hidden gems to discover. So thank you. Yeah, I'll throw it to Anna to ask the first content question about all the cool things that Tanya wrote about.
Yeah, that's definitely something that I was thinking of too, was we always know something about it, but we don't know the intricacies and the details, and that's what we have you for here, Tanya. And I was reading a little bit about what you wrote, and I was surprised to see that he had no descendants, which, kind of led to their decline. So I kind of wanted to see where that stood off, and if you could just tell us a little bit more about how that went for that time period.
Do you mean Philip II, Alexander's father?
It was part of the decline in the first slide. Yeah. So how did the empire decline, essentially, was my question.
Okay, awesome. So once Alexander died, its soldiers didn't really have the same ambition he had. So he really wanted to keep on conquering the world, but its soldiers were just like, we're all fed up. We really don't have the same ambitions you do. We want to go back west, because they missed, their origins, and they were already very far east. So they were like, no, we don't want to keep on going with the conquests. And once Alexander died, there wasn't much reason to keep on with these ambitions. So they were just at the end all fed up. They didn't want to keep on going on growing the empire. And so they decided to just, fight over the territories. And then that was like it just all crumbled at the end because they did. I mean, the reason is they didn't really have the same ambitions Alexander did.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I like that you're starting with the end. I think that's an important
Yeah.
conversation to see how the piece ends. What I like about this empire, this is the only one that's headquartered not in the modern Middle East. And the main reason for that, and I know some other empires have had territory in the modern Middle East, North Africa, but the reason Macedonia was specifically added was the territorial vast land swaths that Alexander the Great conquered to. I mean, he got so far and expanded and connected and traded so much that I think it was really important to have that conversation here. Yes, it's an empire more familiar with people, but also, I don't know, its expansiveness. So, you know, reigning back before it declines after Alexander dies, but up until his death and the land he connected to, the communities he was with and met and conquered, you know, has a modern influence today. And speaking of that, let's sort of jump into your modern influence section, which is one of my favorites, just because I think it's cool to see the impacts of millennia ago. You talk a lot about like the temple building and the architectural style of the Macedonian Empire sort of bleeding with the Persian and other communities, even different religious backgrounds. So curious if you have, you know, more knowledge or aspects or things you want to share in your research on that section specifically.
Of course. Ben, you know how I love culture and I love writing about it. So I also feel like this was one of my favorite parts, just because I feel like what I learned was that Alexander really respected, like in that aspect, like in the cultural aspect, the regions he conquered. So he actually really let them like have their religion and have a bit of their culture as it was. But at the same time, he also, of course, went on with all these Hellenistic cultural background and promoted that. But I love the fact that he actually respected, I mean, all the cultures of the territories he conquered. And there were also some fun facts about how he let Macedonians that conquered these territories even, I mean, turn into Buddhism and respecting all of these caste systems, for example, in India and those regions. So that was very interesting to me.
Wow, that's actually pretty awesome, because like what more do we want if not the freedom to be ourselves and do as we like, and the respect for individualism even within that time, which is quite incredible. And I think that I don't know if Ben had something out in mind, but I think that thinking about that sort of organization that he had and that allegiance that he said, it kind of took me back to when I was reading about the ruling system and how it was centralized, how it was very organized, and I wanted to know a little bit more. What did you think about that, and did you like that? And in comparison, even to that vast region, like how do you get such an organized government in such a big space after all he's conquered? You know, like it just got me thinking.
Yeah, exactly. The thing is, at the beginning, once it started growing, of course, it was very easy. I mean, it was easier. So they did have a very well centralized political system. But once it started growing, things weren't that easy anymore. So they started to have trouble because of the vast territory. So then they started trying with different forms of government. So some of them were actually autonomous cities, and others really reported directly to Alexander's rule. But yeah, at the beginning it was very centralized, but then little by little, as it started expanding, it wasn't so easy to keep, I mean, that ruling system. So they were more of an indirect way of government.
Fascinating. And that's a pretty similar like governing structure to a lot of these ancient empires. Is I mean, especially with how large Macedonia was, they had to have some sort of communication hub and, you know, little communities all throughout. Cool. Just thanks for adding to our knowledge base on them. I know Anna's background is very interested in the political system, so I'll keep those questions with her. Yeah, I don't know. There's just my assumption is that some of these parts were hard to keep down to one words because there's so much information on this empire. a kind of rarity in the Civilizations 101 section to have the difficulty of cutting downwards. But I'm curious on the final 101 that you chose specifically for the key accomplishments section, which again, I mean, I love all my sections, I have to say, but the modern influence key accomplishments are so similar to me, and I really like to see, the legacy and the impact that these communities have made today. You talked quite a lot about the spreading of culture, which again I know is your sweet spot as our culture fellow anyways. Literally from Gibraltar, Spain, all the way to Punjab, India. I mean, the swath of land is just, again, that's why he's the great. But through the coinage or the trading networks, just what key accomplishments and aspects you find most fascinating about this civilization empire?
What I would say would be some of, to me, the most important would be that definitely this empire paved the way to the Roman Empire and to Christianity and the Byzantine rule, which I would say are also periods of time that define history, right? So I think that if it wasn't for Alexander the Great and the Macedonian Empire, all of these other things that went after wouldn't have been the same. So I definitely think it was a key period in history, and it defined other key periods in history. So I would say the greatest accomplishment would be that it paved the way to other great civilizations.
Yeah, and I could believe that, just because of the style and the structure, like Ben mentioned. So in the political stuff, I can see how a lot of these governments were centralized the same way, all responding to the same person, sort of like a king, kind of like a monarchy type of style, having soldiers in different cities, kind of keeping like, kind of like that dynasty sort of structure to it, which makes a lot of sense to these times. It makes me wonder, how did they get money to continue? I mean, we're talking about the region all the way to Punjab, India. So I did see some economics there and him, like the coinage idea, but more in depth of how, like, was there a tax system installed, kind of like there was on Seljuk when I was reading about it. And they were big on trading, and what did that look like, and that sort of thing.
Yeah, well, as Ben read a little bit about it in the introduction, but the thing here was the geographical position of the Macedonian Empire. It made it very good for trading. So it was between Europe and Asia. So all of these regions had a lot of trade. So that's why it was a very rich empire. Not leaving behind the fact that it was so huge. I mean, of course, it had so many ways, of enriching itself. But I would say the key point here would be its geographical position and how it all had a lot of roots of trade within it.
I mean, it's so fascinating to not only have so much landmass to be able to effectively administer, control, collaborate, communicate. And again, this was in BCE, so 2000 plus years ago. I mean, that there's a reason he's called the Great. There's a reason we know so much about him. I mean, that is so wild. I really can't think of another word. That is such a huge accomplishment, achievement. I mean, some modern countries with all the technology we have don't have the same levels of communication. I'm not shading anyone in particular, but like that's just not right. That's not the same.
Exactly.
Wow. I mean, tell me more of your, admiration, excitement, reaction to all this.
Yeah, well, as I started reading about the Macedonian Empire, Philip II, which was Alexander's father, also had this ambition to conquer the Persian Empire, but he died before that could ever happen. And so it was just, to me, very fascinating how Alexander managed to do the same. I mean, what his father wanted to achieve, and he did. And also, definitely the Macedonian Empire wouldn't have been what it was without the figure of Alexander the Great. And I also found fascinating that Aristotle was his teacher. So of course he learned about him a lot. So I just find fascinating the fact that one thing wouldn't have been the same without the other. and how, I mean, Aristotle helped Alexander be what it was, and then Alexander just paved the way for all of this Macedonian civilization, and this civilization paved the way for other great civilizations like the Roman Empire. So, I mean, that was to me very, very fascinating.
I can't decide whether it was, greater than any other empire ever known, just because of just thinking about, like Ben mentioned, this is BCE, so many years ago, like how we didn't even have the thoughts or the infrastructure or anything to be this centralized, to have this kind of common mind. And the fact that he was one person with this thought, it is absolutely, like you said, fascinating. I think that one of the other things that I kept thinking about, because I actually didn't go through this section very clearly, and it was the key accomplishment. And I know you mentioned that he paved the way for other empires, but was there anything in particular or an influence that we still have of him today? I know that there was coinage. I don't know if the currency, changed after his rule and that sort of thing. And just anything that you can remember that really struck out to you, that you feel that, it was, I don't know, more relatable or influenced today.
Yeah. Well, exactly. As you just mentioned, the coinage, Alexander turned silver and gold into coinage. So I think that's very interesting for those times. I mean, not for now, for us now, it's like, yeah, I mean, we're used to that. But yeah, but I mean, that time, I feel like it was very, very clever to do that, and very modern, right, for those times. And he also, I mean, as I just said, since Aristotle was his teacher, he was a very prepared person. I mean, no wonder why the empire was so huge. But he also, due to the conquest he made, we now have a lot of advances in geography and natural science, because I mean, that was like, I mean, all that he did and all the conquest, of course, just gave us a lot of the information we didn't know, maybe about the roots, or about yeah, a lot of things that he managed when he did that. So I would say, yeah, that's, I mean, most of the things that we have nowadays, thanks to Alexander the Great.
That's true. That's true. I did see something about the map only extending to certain areas until he was the one that was kind of going through it, which is totally amazing. You're absolutely right. We didn't know those lands before him, so he is the great.
I mean, we can go on forever. There are so many pieces here. And I mean, I think we've barely scratched the surface on this empire. It also predates Alexander the Great. I mean, he definitely was the thing we're most well known about. But I'm curious if you have any, like, before Alexander, pieces of what this made this empire so magical. My very limited understanding of history is that it sort of spun out of the Greek and Roman empires of the time, but centralized in Macedonia, which is a whole EU contested thing between the Republic of Macedonia, North Macedonia, and Greece. We won't get into that, but like, I'm curious on the pre-Alexander pieces of this empire, and it's sort of, if it had some similar ambitions. Obviously, his father wanted to conquer Persia, but more of those pieces I would love to hear about from you.
Yeah, well, even though I would really say that it wouldn't be the same without Alexander, and it's hard to think about the empire without him. It is true. His father had these huge ambitions about conquering the Persian Empire, and of course, they did have those sort of military ambitions before. And actually, the Macedonian Empire was for almost 100 years one of the most dynamic states of that time. But of course, the 11 years in which Alexander was the ruler were like the most dynamic of all those 100 years, because that's when it really grew to its large expanse. But yeah, it was a very dynamic region, and it really did have some sort of ambitions, but it was never the same until Alexander the Great got into rule.
So fascinating. And did my very, very, very brief summary of the origins of Macedonia fill and align with your research? I really don't know much about it. I very much just spitballed. So.
Yeah.
Cool. Good. I'm glad.
To be honest, To be honest, I didn't know much about it either. I am so glad that, we're doing this right now, because I feel like, wow, I'm learning about something that like I should know about. Like, come on, it's Alexander the Great, but like, no, I'm very fascinated also just to see everything, how it rolled out.
Yeah, but I feel like even though you research about it, there's also, I mean, a lot of things that you don't know. I mean, I don't know if you ever, already know everything about the empire, there are just so many things. So
Right.
yeah.
Wow.
This is
I mean, yes. What I so love about all of the civilizations in reviews generally, but also these talkbacks, is to sort of have that, oh wow, there's this piece. Oh wow, I didn't realize. Oh, there's connected here. And again, we're not going to talk about modern, European Union difficulties or anything in that sense. Really Al-Fuzayk is focused on the Middle East and North Africa, but because of this expansion and the architecture, the coinage, the trade routes, everything that you've written about, Tanya, is exactly why you're on this call today. So just such incredible pieces here. We can go on forever. And again, we totally could, because there's so much information about this empire available. But as we sort of start to wrap up, are there any sort of final tidbits, cool research, fun facts that you learned about this empire that you'd like to share?
Yeah, well, as I love culture. Again, I love the fact that Alexander promoted like the creation of Alexandria in Egypt. And his influence is not just, how we remember him in history books, but the fact there's a city named after him in a country such as Egypt. I think that really depicts his importance to history all over the world. And yeah, I would say that's a cool fun fact. And now I have to go because I really want to get to know why it's called Alexandria.
Lovely point. There's
now
more.
we all have to go.
Yeah, Al-Fuzayk trip, everyone. We'll meet you.
Yeah.
There's many Alexandrias outside of where his empire would have lasted. I live basically in the Virginia version in the United States, but yeah, no, that's a lovely point too. That legacy is on top of the culture, the communication, the coins, the architecture, the history, the knowledge. Also, the legacy of the specific city and its importance in modern Egyptian life. Great point. Any final questions you have for Tanya, Anna, before we move on?
No, I definitely just wanted to tell her that, even though I'm not on the cultural aspect, you've got me like thinking and feeling it. And I'm like, oh my God, I really want to know how he was so culturally aware of everyone and allowed the individualism, which is like one of the things that I love the most. So thank you so much, Tanya. And like your time was so valuable. And like this has been great.
Thank you guys. I really had a great time.
Well, that's a beautiful space to end it on. Thank you, Anna, for wrapping up so lovely. So thanks all so much for tuning in for another really informative and fascinating Civilizations in Review. Please check out all the great writings Tanya did. There's still more we didn't talk about, as you could probably imagine. So head off to our website. That's alfuzaic.net, ALFUSAIC.net. Thanks so much. Have a good evening.
Bye.